Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar, Employee Perceptions of Workplace Safety in 2025. This event, brought to you by Security Magazine, is sponsored by AlertMedia. And now I'm excited to turn it over to today's presenters. Katie Goen will introduce them to you.
Thank you so much, Taylor. And hello, everyone. I'm Katie Goen, Director of Communications at AlertMedia. I'm really excited to be a co-moderator today with Taylor to discuss employee perceptions of workplace safety in 2025. So all of us at AlertMedia are always excited for this webinar every year because we get to give you all a preview of the insights from our 2025 Employee Safety Report. So I think you're going to really find this data helpful, useful certainly, and maybe even a little surprising. So we have a great presentation in store for you today, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to our speakers today. So first we have Danielle Sherman with us today. She's founder and CEO of Wired Research. Her team conducted this year's survey, and they also analyzed the data to uncover insights that will help businesses improve their safety culture. Thanks so much for being here, Danielle.
Thank you so much, Katie. I'm thrilled as always to be here chatting with everyone today about the latest survey, which, as you mentioned, yielded a ton of really fascinating insights that we're going to be sharing across the webinar today. So thanks for having me.
Of course. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I'd also like to introduce Peter Steinfeld. He's the Senior Vice President of Safety Solutions at AlertMedia. Peter's been in the communications industry for more than 20 years now, and he's really helped organizations of all sizes and all industries level up their employee safety, business continuity, and emergency preparedness initiatives. He's also the host of the Employee Safety Podcast at AlertMedia. Hi, Peter. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Fantastic to be here. This is one of my favorite reports that we release and one of my favorite sessions that we do. So looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a sneak peek of what we're going to talk about over the next little bit. This year's report really revealed some eye-opening trends in how employees perceive workplace safety. So today we're going to cover first what employees expect from their employers when it comes to safety. Some identified gaps in emergency preparedness and employee readiness. We'll go over some employee perceptions of their employer's safety efforts. We'll talk about the impact of stress, right? Employee stress on workplace safety. And then finally, we will tie it all up in a nice little bow for you and give you some actionable takeaways for how your organization and employees can benefit from all of this. So first thing I'd like to do is go ahead and turn it over to Peter. He is going to go over the research summary, and then Danielle will also review our methodology. So Peter, take it away.
Thank you, Katie. I appreciate that. There is a lot to cover, so I'm going to jump right in. So AlertMedia's 2025 Employee Safety Report surveyed thousands of global employees to understand their perceptions of safety in order to arm employers with insights into how they can deliver on employees' safety expectations. That's really what this is all about. I believe it's really important to understand how employee safety expectations evolve and change over the years based on factors like intensifying weather and natural disasters or economic uncertainty, all the different global conflicts that are going on, and even shifts in employees' personal stress and well-being. So that's why AlertMedia releases this report annually, so we can really help you understand these trends and nuances over time. When leaders address employee concerns and foster an overall culture of safety built on trust, communication, and employee support, it really benefits both employees and the organizations, just creating a more resilient, productive, and empowered workforce. So Danielle, I'll turn it over to you to talk about the survey methodology, which I think is really important.
Awesome. Thanks, Peter. So we reached a sample of 2,000 US employees and 1,000 employees in the UK. Important to note that all of our respondents were employed full-time. and included a really nice broad cross-section of employees, including managers and non-managers alike. Wanted to make sure we had that dual perspective. The sample spanned the entirety of each of the countries, ensuring that we had a really balanced representation of factors like geography, industry, and then other key demographics like gender, age, and racial and ethnic diversity. The survey itself was fielded between November 4th and November 20th, 2024. So let's definitely dive in. The first section is employee expectations of safety. I think as we begin unpacking the findings of this year's report, it's important to start with this very critical lens of employee expectations. And as we move through this section, we're going to see just how deeply rooted expectations around safety are. So we're going to dive right in. This first slide here, this is the data that really sets the stage. 96% of employees say that being physically safe at work is important to them. That's nearly universal agreement. This data point tells us that safety is not optional, it's foundational. We've been doing this research long enough to know that if employees don't feel safe, nothing else matters, right? Not benefits, not culture, not even compensation. So this stat right here is really setting the stage for us. When we asked employees to rank how important certain aspects of their workplace and their work life were, physical safety was seen as being extremely important by close to 4 in 5 employees, which is significantly more than other aspects of their work life, like their productivity, the company's reputation. And you'll see that data here on this slide. There's quite a drop off. This reinforces what we saw in the previous slide, that everyone, whether it's frontline workers or corporate teams, really value their physical safety at work and want to feel that their employer has their back. But as we move on to the next slide, we see that physical safety is not the only concern. Psychological safety is right there alongside of it. And our data shows that the majority of employees consider mental health to be extremely important. This can include everything from stress levels and emotional well-being to feeling respected and heard. And more employees want to work in an environment where they feel safe speaking up without fear of retaliation or stigma. And as we see here, it's those younger generations, those who have years left in their careers, who are the most likely of all to really place that critical importance on mental health and psychological safety. Peter, I'm going to turn it over to you to maybe share some thoughts on how employers might apply these insights within their organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing those insights. Understanding what employees expect from workplace safety is just the first step. In order to create a safer environment, organizations really need to turn these insights into action. So first, safety must be embedded into the company culture. That's absolutely critical. It can't just be treated as a compliance requirement. It can't just be a checkbox. So do what you can to make it a core value at your organization and encourage its adoption company-wide. And this really starts at the top with leadership, and then it will trickle down. That start at the top is so crucial. Without that, it's just not going to be successful. And then second, be sure to regularly remind employees of the mental health resources that are available to them. The current workforce finds psychological safety to be extremely important, as Danielle said, so make sure that they know how to take advantage of any wellness programs, employee assistance programs, even things like quiet rooms, fitness centers that they might have access to, and other similar type benefits. And then finally, engagement really matters. When leadership actively involves employees in safety conversations and decisions, it actually builds more trust, more awareness, and accountability across the organization. Back to you, Danielle.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter. Our next section is going to explore the gap between employee expectations and actual safety readiness at work. So let's dive in. This slide for me is where the disconnect really becomes clear. even though safety, as we already mentioned, is a top priority for employees, many still don't feel completely safe at work. And this slide visualizes that gap, and it's quite a serious one. We see that about 1 in 4 employees have experienced or are experiencing increasing workplace safety fears, and they admit that there's something about their job that's currently making them afraid. Nearly twice as many as that flat out don't feel safe at work. It's no surprise then that 51% are saying that their expectations for safety have also increased alongside this in recent years. One thing is certain coming out of the research: when employees don't feel safe, it impacts everything: their focus, productivity, morale, and trust. And we're going to get into a bit of this in the coming slides, especially at the intersection when emergencies arise. Now, this next stat is very striking. We see that 81% of employees have experienced an emergency while at work. Important to note, this is not a limited concern. This is the majority, right? These experiences are not just theoretical. They are lived realities for most employees. And what this tells us is that safety planning really needs to start reflecting the actual experiences of the workforce. Emergencies are happening, employees are paying attention, and employers really need to understand what those experiences look like. When we get to the next slide, we're able to really start to break down the types of emergencies that employees have faced. And as you can see on this slide, the variety is certainly notable. This reinforces the idea that organizations truly need to understand their unique risk profile and tailor their emergency preparedness accordingly, because clearly employees are encountering a very wide range of emergency scenarios. Now, here's the concerning part of all of this. Despite the majority saying they've experienced emergencies, we see that 35%, more than 1 in 3 employees, don't feel prepared to handle one today. That's a big gap between exposure and readiness, and an even larger gap when we start to break this down and look at it by generation. We see that it's the younger generations who are feeling the least prepared. It's suggesting that perhaps current safety programs could be outdated, undercommunicated, maybe just not taken seriously. Whatever the case, there is quite a disconnect that is happening there that we really need to focus on. So, Peter, I'm going to turn it over to you to share some thoughts on how employers might help prepare their employees for emergencies.
Yeah, well, I think the research clearly shows that employees don't always feel safe or, as you just said, prepared to respond to a workplace emergency. But organizations absolutely have the power to change all that. And one of the most effective ways is to implement regular anonymous employee safety perception surveys, which really help you identify gaps in preparedness and give you a direct line of communication to your workers, which is so important. Employers should also take a proactive approach by enhancing and improving safety trainings, drills, and all the tabletop exercises that you want to do to ensure employees know exactly what to do in a crisis. Building that muscle memory is so important. Regular, fun, and engaging safety trainings really make learning more effective, and they encourage participation, and they help employees feel more confident in handling emergencies when they pop up. They also create muscle memory, as I mentioned, for your workers, so they can act more quickly when a critical incident occurs. They don't freeze like a deer in the headlights. That's something you always want to avoid. So by taking these steps, organizations really can create a safer and more prepared workforce. Danielle?
Fantastic. Our next section is going to cover employee perceptions of safety efforts. We want to understand what employees think about their employer's commitment to safety and where leadership efforts might currently be falling short. So we're going to dive in here. According to our data, 1 in 4 employees believe their employer is not currently doing everything that they could be to keep them safe. And, even among those who might not say this outright, they may still be be a bit of a skeptic. When we look at the numbers, we see that only 1 in 3 employees feel that their employer is what we would call a safety pioneer, someone who's leading the way in safety efforts. This perception issue is rather critical. In safety, perception and reality go hand in hand. If employees are not believing that their employer is prioritizing their safety, it's not going to matter how many protocols or tools that employer might have in place. If it's not cutting through that noise, it's going to be falling short. That's how employees are going to actually see it. And as we get to this next slide, we see this beautiful chart that is actually showing us something really important. It's driving home this idea of that big disconnect, that gap between what employees value and what they believe their employer values. And in every category that we tested that was focused on safety, employees consistently rate safety as being more important to them than they think it is to their employer. And this delta is what is really creating this sense of distrust. I mean, you can see it here. Again, all those elements around the safety, employees overwhelmingly feel that it's more important to them and their employer is not taking it as seriously as some other things like the employee's reputation or the employer's bottom line. And even worse, I think many employees feel that their organization's safety efforts have actually plateaued. There's a sense of that progress has pretty much stalled, that maybe safety was a bigger focus during past crises, past times, but has since faded into the background. This perception here really creates a sense of vulnerability. Employees want to see continued growth, continued investment, not just a temporary response to a single one-off event. And again, you really see that in this slide here. When we asked, if their employer has made more of an effort, the same amount of an effort, and there's quite a big gap there. Peter, I'm going to turn it back to you to share some insight into how organizations can improve, overall employee perceptions around safety efforts.
You bet. One thing I'll mention is that Danielle and I are just the messengers here. So we're just relaying to you what the employees feel. So please don't shoot the messenger. But what you just talked about is pretty straightforward. Employees really need to know how they're being protected in order to have a strong perception of workplace safety. So be sure to tell them, show them, and involve them. Transparency matters a lot. Make your safety initiatives very visible through announcements, signage, emails, on TVs and monitors and common spaces, and even verbal reminders. Use all those methods that you have at your disposal. It's really, really important. And then you can also consider forming a safety committee so employees themselves can take some ownership. It's another way for employees to have a voice in identifying risks and safety improvements. Anytime people are a part of something, they're much more likely to buy into it. And they're also the people that are on the ground floor seeing all these risks and things like that. And of course, they're the ones that are concerned about these things. So they can bubble all that information up to you, and then you know exactly what to focus on instead of wasting a bunch of time on things that people don't care about. So that involvement is incredibly crucial. Danielle?
Thanks, Peter, for those insights. Now we are going to jump into taking a good look at the role stress plays in workplace safety. And this is a really exciting section for me as it's sort of new territory that we dug into a little bit in this year's survey. So what we see here is that stress is a related, but perhaps often overlooked part of workplace safety. High stress levels don't just impact performance or mental health, they also have an impact on how safe people feel on the job. In many ways, you might say that stress is a rather silent safety hazard. And if it's not addressed, it can truly start to erode trust and compound other safety concerns. And the data on this slide really confirms that. Stress is a top contributor to feelings of being unsafe in the workplace. Think of it this way: when people are overworked or unsupported or emotionally drained, when they're feeling that stress, it becomes harder to process information, perhaps respond to emergencies, or feel secure more generally. So reducing stress isn't just a wellness initiative. It's certainly a core part of keeping employees safe. And when we asked employees what prevents them from feeling completely safe at work, the answers were diverse, but certainly interconnected. Things like workload pressure, unclear procedures, fear of retaliation showed up. These are all factors that tie into stress and culture. And fixing them certainly requires looking beyond policies and examining maybe how people are actually experiencing work on a day-to-day basis. And as we see in these numbers, high stress was the number one thing that makes people feel unsafe at work. And then we have a bit of a drop off, but poor communication is right up there with it. Lack of support from leadership, also right up there with it. So again, it's showing that interconnectedness between all of these different factors. Another common stressor that employees face is safety reporting. And as we see here on this slide, many organizations are encouraging safety reporting, which is certainly, a step in the right direction. Theoretically, when employees are invited to speak up about hazards or concerns, it certainly creates a more proactive safety culture overall. We see here that about 4 in 5 employees also say that communication around the process has also been very well communicated. It's something that they feel prepared for, that they would know how to do. But as we'll get into on the next slide, encouragement alone doesn't always result in action. As we see here, despite that encouragement, employees still have concerns about reporting safety issues. 1 in 3 aren't comfortable reporting safety issues at all. 2 in 5 actually told us that they've already experienced retaliation for reporting issues in the past. And 1 in 3 are worried that they're not going to be taken seriously by leadership. These concerns can really silence important feedback and actually make it harder to identify and fix very real issues that might be occurring. And if the process doesn't feel safe, again, we're sort of going back to this, people are not going to use it. If that perception is there that there is something about safety reporting to be afraid of or scared of, employees are not going to go through with it. So really important for employers to understand, because on this next slide, we start to see the real cost of these concerns. When employees are uncomfortable reporting safety issues, it doesn't just put into question the real issues that might be happening. It starts to undermine the entire system. It begins to stall progress. It creates an environment where risks are going unaddressed, but even more detrimental, it erodes trust and impacts employee engagement in a big way. As we see here, 45% say they would not feel completely engaged at work, and 47% say they don't completely trust their employer. So pretty big, startling numbers here. And Peter, it probably makes sense to turn it over to you to walk us through some ways that organizations can use these insights to help reduce some of that workplace stress for their employees.
Absolutely. As Danielle just mentioned, when employees feel safer, they are less stressed and more likely to stay focused and engaged, and that's just good for business. So here are just a couple recommendations for reducing employee stress, which will hopefully create happier, safer, and more productive workforces. So first, reevaluate your reporting processes. If employees are feeling at all fearful to report safety concerns or near misses, your reporting process needs improvement. Consider some kind of reporting system that is anonymous or maybe unretaliatory is a good way to phrase it. The focus should always be on the problem, not the person. And I know that's hard because psychologically, when something goes wrong, for whatever reason, humans want to blame somebody. And we need to avoid that. We need to say, hey, something happened. The problem is the big part and people are involved, but it's the problem we have to focus on first. People really need to feel comfortable that that is the culture in your company. Then you want to make sure you're investigating and following through on the safety concerns that have been reported. So be sure to create an action plan to resolve all those issues and then communicate them company-wide. Let employees know when and how the issue was resolved. Closure is very important psychologically. Without it, people just wonder, whatever happened with that? Well, I guess I don't feel very safe. No one ever did anything with it. And then finally, think about ways to reward and celebrate safety achievements. This really creates positivity around something that could be bad. So that's really important. And oftentimes it creates some healthy competition around safety. And that's good. When people start to compete, they look for ways to win. And that's what you want people to do, is win when it comes to safety. So these really are just a few ways you can alleviate employee stress and anxiety when it comes to workplace safety. Now, as we move on, here are a few additional ways that you can apply all these insights. When organizations increase safety efforts, they see clear benefits. As you can see here with these two data points, employees who believe their employer has made more of an effort to ensure their safety over the past year, they're more likely to feel physically, mentally, and psychologically safe at work compared to those who think their organization's efforts were reduced or just remained the same. Employees are also 40% more likely to completely trust their employer when they see increased organizational safety efforts. Now, when asked what employees need to feel safe and supported, clear instructions, timely updates, and follow-up information ranked as top priorities. So the next time a safety issue arises at your organization, be sure to communicate clear instructions to all your employees on the individual steps that they should take during the situation. Then be sure to provide your employees with timely updates as you gain more information, because all these situations are fluid and dynamic. You've got to observe and then report. As we learned today, employees really value that transparency. It's huge. Psychologically, that's just what we need as humans. And then finally, don't forget to follow up with additional information or even additional action items after the safety event has resolved. Keeping your employees fully informed throughout the process will definitely help them feel safe and supported. Ultimately, when your workforce feels safe, your organization will thrive. The graph on the left here shows the correlation between employee safety and employer trust. As you can see, employees who feel completely safe at work are much more likely to trust their employers. Seems obvious. It's a similar result with employee engagement. As you can see on the right graph here, fostering a workplace where employees feel secure, supported, and valued really contributes to a more resilient organization overall. So, if you remember nothing else from today's presentation, remember these key takeaways. First and foremost, break down reporting barriers. Provide anonymous, easy-to-use channels for reporting safety concerns without any kind of fear of retaliation. A culture of open communication really allows organizations to address risks proactively, and they don't lurk in the background and then bite you later. Next, make sure you integrate mental health support. Years ago, this was not a thing. Today it is. It's accepted, and you should absolutely do it. Just make mental well-being a core part of workplace safety by offering counseling, stress management, training, and employee assistance programs, and make sure people are aware of them. And then third, incorporate employee feedback. actively involved. Whenever you can, actively involve employees in safety initiatives through audits, trainings, surveys, and after debriefs. So after action debrief type things. Their insights throughout this process really create practical trust building solutions. And then fourth, ensure clear and timely communication. Use strategic communication tools to deliver critical updates efficiently, keeping all your employees informed without any unnecessary distractions. And then lastly, just overall foster a culture of safety and transparency. Encourage accountability at all levels of the organization, literally from the top to the bottom, and then celebrate safety milestones. Take time to do that. And then lead by example to build long-term trust and commitment. Taking these steps, and others too, will really help organizations align with employee expectations, strengthen that trust that you're looking for, and then create a safer, more resilient workplace overall. All right, I hope you've all gained actionable insights on employee perceptions of safety based on today's material. I think it's really beneficial to see where the numbers fall when you talk to people. Having the right strategies in place is essential, but organizations also need the right tools to execute them effectively. And that's what we can help you with here at AlertMedia. Our software helps you keep your people safe, informed, and connected no matter where they live, work, or travel. Generally speaking, to deliver the highest level of safety and achieve better outcomes when bad things happen, the more you can compress that cycle between an incident awareness into actually taking action on it, the better outcome that you're going to experience. And that's precisely what we do. It's through a combination of people and technology. We're constantly monitoring the world for anything that can impact employee safety or business continuity. And then we quickly alert our customers to what's going on. So you don't have to pay attention to all that. We just send you the alerts when it's actually overlapping with where you have people living, working, and traveling. And then you can better protect them because you're quicker to action. And then we combine that with a global mass communication capability. So our customers can quickly reach out to any employee anywhere in the world on multiple channels with helpful information, and even enable those recipients that are getting the information to respond with helpful information back the other way, so you can triage the situation better and know where you need to focus your efforts. So really think of our software and team as a tremendous force multiplier for you, helping you keep your people safe, informed, and connected, again, no matter where they live, work, or travel. Katie, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. That is just the most excellent segue, because I do want to launch just a quick poll before we get to all the audience questions. So, you just heard Peter explain how AlertMedia can help, but if you would like to learn more about how we can improve employee safety specifically at your organization, you can say yes, and we will get you all of the information that you need. You can also say no, not right now, and no hard feelings at all. We'll be here if you need us in the future. So I'm going to give this poll just another couple seconds, but I also wanted to take this moment to mention that what Danielle and Peter are hitting on today is just the tip of the iceberg. This report is just full of insights that I think you'll find really, really fascinating. So in just a moment, I'll also have a QR code on the slide that you can use to go ahead and download it now if you want to get your phones ready. All right, let's get to some audience questions. Danielle, let me start with this one because I think this is super interesting personally. Were there any findings in this year's research that surprised you compared to previous years? I know we sort of build on this each year, so I wanted to specifically ask.
Great question. I think that I continue to be surprised every year by what I would call like the continued stagnation in employer safety efforts, despite always seeing this growing employee concern and the repeated emergencies that they're facing. And we referenced earlier in the presentation that employer safety efforts appear to be stagnant, even though we know the majority of employees have experienced an emergency at work. And that disconnect around how many still don't feel prepared to handle emergencies I think I come into this study every year hoping to see momentum in emergency preparedness and communication when we do these surveys, but it seems like this year progress seems to have plateaued, and really putting that renewed focus on the importance of employee safety and building that safety culture. So that's, for me, what is most top of mind coming out of this survey.
Danielle, I'm going to stick with you for another second. Have you ever, or has AlertMedia ever considered polling frontline employees to see about those who, in public facing roles, if they have, more or less fear compared to the others that don't deal with the public?
Yeah. So since the inception of the Employee Safety Report, there has always been the inclusion of frontline workers as well. And I believe a few years ago, we may have actually cut the data to look at those who were considered to be frontline versus those who weren't, to see if there were any shifts. We'll have to dig into this year's data a little bit to see what we might be able to pull out where that's concerned. But the sample itself does include a really broad sampling of employees, which do include, of course, our frontline workers as well.
Excellent. Understood. Peter, I have one for you. You mentioned employee trust and safety efforts. Where should our attendees start if they're looking to rebuild trust with their employees?
Yeah, I mean, it's always tough and every organization is different, but really it's all about communication and transparency. They really go hand in hand. Don't pretend like you don't know everything or that you know everything and tell people, we got it handled. Like, you have to be clear that you're working on it. It's an evolution. It's a journey that you're going through, and don't hide things from people. Humans have an absolute built-in BS detector for this kind of behavior. So you want to communicate a lot and be very transparent. And then I think really start to involve your people in the next steps of building out your program. I talked about it before, but people who are part of the process will actually trust it much more than if it's forced on them from the outside. So that involvement is really key.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much. And we just got a comment that came in. And guys, this is a great time for me to say, it doesn't have to be a question that you post in the Q&A. It can be a comment, maybe an experience that you've had personally. But one of our folks said that scared employees are like a dull knife. The cut is worse and causes more trauma and longer healing. If they're feeling unsafe, they will likely make decisions or take actions out of fear, which will likely result in bad decisions with a lot of second and third order negative effects. Peter, would you agree with that statement in 100%. General?
Yeah, that's a fantastic way to put it. That's excellent.
I think scared employees are like a dull knife. We need to use that one moving forward. Very good analogy. Danielle, anything to add to that at all?
No, I think it goes hand in hand with what we were saying earlier as well about the perception versus reality. It just starts to slowly erode the trust. It has that impact that over time that dull knife is going to keep hitting. So spot on.
And, we have a few folks asking about year-over-year trends, which leads me to believe that maybe they've attended this webinar before. It makes me very, very happy. But have you seen any shifts in this perception year over year, like how employees feel their employer prioritizes productivity and reputation specifically?
Yeah, so the research reveals that employees continue to believe, to a large degree, this is year over year, that their employer prioritizes, you mentioned productivity, reputation, over safety. And we saw that earlier in the presentation as well, that the percentages for employers who are valuing productivity and reputation are much higher than the percentages that we saw around how much employees believe they are prioritizing safety, both mental and physical. And these sentiments have remained relatively unchanged since we first started fielding this survey a few years ago. So in terms of, trending, I would just say that it continues to be a pretty prominent disconnect. Not much has really changed there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for that. And then, Peter, I'm going to put this one to you since you're our communication expert. What do you think some of the common mistakes are that companies are making when it comes to safety communication? Because you had mentioned on a slide, safety communication might be happening, but it may not necessarily be effective.
Yeah, and this could be tough. And like I said before with my other answer, it's different for every organization, but there's some typical things I see often go wrong. And the first and foremost thing is around volume. Too much, and people start to tune it out, but not enough. And then they respond to surveys in the way they did to ours, which is what you're trying to fix. So communication before, during, and after incidents all have different needs and nuances, and every company and culture are different. So just stop and give it some thought and experiment with what's best for your particular situation. Some groups of people into the company might want to get constant updates. Others are like, no, don't bother me. Like maybe once a day or at the end of the week or something. You just have to experiment and don't try a one size fits all approach. So always think about volume and what's right for you. Another big one is around direction. So any kind of communication should not be one way. And that's a big mistake a lot of companies make. It's just, push the information out. That's all we have to do. Whether you're training or you're communicating during a live emergency or safety incident, always be sure that communication is bi-directional. That real-time feedback dramatically improves outcomes and how people feel. And then I would say probably the last thing is the medium. It's got to be multi-channel these days. With so many ways to communicate today, you'd think it would be easier than ever to get people's attention. It's not. Not everybody pays attention to the same channels, so you have to meet your varied audience where they are. That could be via text messaging with some people, email with others, web resources pages that some people like to go to because they really want to get in the weeds. Maybe it's Microsoft Teams or Slack or digital displays. And you have to think generationally. People like to consume information in different ways. So there's all these different channels out there that are available to you. And if you're not taking advantage of them, you're not going to be connecting with people. So I'd say it's those things. It's, what did I say? Volume, appropriate, direction, two-way, and then the medium itself. All those mediums, you got to use them all.
That's very thorough answer, Peter. Thank you. That's wonderful. And would you add to that and say multi-language communications if the organization has multiple language speakers?
Yeah. So if anyone out there is dealing with that, always think about, it's kind of like the medium. It's very similar. People aren't paying attention to the same channels and people don't pay attention to the same languages. So I kind of would loop it in as a sub bullet point of that last one. So absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And Danielle, do you have any highlights that you could just quickly review from the rest of the report that maybe we didn't hit on here in the webinar, just like what the general trends are that they can expect to see?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that our survey yields a ton of compelling data that we simply do not have time to share within the presentation. For each of the sections that we explored, we obviously went much deeper into expectations and perceptions that we would be happy to share more information. I know, Katie, you're going to share some of our information on how to access this info at the close of today's session. But I will say that, as every year, we like to dig in and start to see what are some of those emerging trends that we're seeing that might be different from what we've seen in past years. And I would say this year for me, one of the clearest emerging trends was the elevation of that psychological safety to as much the same level as physical safety. And we dug into that in the additional research quite a bit. We know that employees are placing extreme importance on mental health related safety, which is really telling us that the focus, should not and cannot be squarely on physical threats and emergency protocols. I also think that we have a lot of great highlights to share around employee expectations and how they're shifting toward proactive engagement and communication. Namely, employees want to be involved in safety conversations. They want that anonymous and retaliation-free reporting platform and mechanism. They're increasingly seeing stress and not just physical threats as barriers to feeling safe. all of these elements are areas that we went even deeper into that did not make it into the presentation. I think the main takeaway is that the data tells us that in today's day and age, employee definitions of safety are broadening and becoming much more holistic. They're combining physical, emotional, and organizational trust factors, and it's certainly something that employers need to take note of. So a lot more of that data that can be shared that we only just really scratched the surface on today.
Well, Danielle, that was an excellent answer. How could we not segue right to our employee safety report so that you can find all of these insights that Danielle was mentioning. So if you have a second and you want to snap this QR code, feel free to do that now. But you're also going to get it from us. It might even be in these handouts. I'm not sure. But if you want it right this moment, check that QR code. All right, I'm going to leave it up for like 3 more seconds. And at this time, I really just want to take a moment to thank Danielle and Peter. We've had many questions coming in about whether or not we're going to share your contact information. So you might be getting some emails after this, guys. So you can reach Danielle and Peter at their email addresses here on the slide. Please be gentle. As Peter said, they're just the messengers. Thank you guys so much. Danielle, we really appreciate you explaining this to us in layperson's terms that we can all understand.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And to all the attendees today, really hope that you're walking away with some valuable information and hopefully look forward to fielding some additional inquiries in the days that follow. But thank you all so much. That's an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Danielle. And Peter, any final thoughts from you?
That's the one I always add to the end of this, which is people always ask me, how can I get executives to buy in to investing in safety? And I always say it's a 2-step process. First, you want to tug at the heartstrings by giving anecdotal stories of near misses, safety incidents, things like that, because that opens their mind and they're willing to listen. But to get to be able to tug at the purse strings, to get the money to flow, you have to share data, because that's really what they care about. And that's exactly what you get in this report. So you'll get actual hard numbers. We've surveyed thousands of people, and the data is going to make them say, okay, I hear your story, and now I see the data really backs it up. And that's going to help you get the funding that you need.
Such a good point. Well, that is all that we have for you guys today. I just wanted to thank you all for attending this webinar. We love your participation, your engagement, and we hope to see you again at a future AlertMedia webinar. Of course, Security Magazine, we couldn't do this without you guys. Thank you for being just such a wonderful partner.